these incidents that she mentioned, some go far back as 2010. I believe, winter of 2010, multiple times that in years ago, where there was no criminal prosecution, no reporting to the police, and in fact, after these alleged incidents occurred, she elected to live with me, have children with me, engage in publishing projects with me, and again, she has a great deal of continuity in terms of where she's living right now. So if you judge this whole situation by her own actions, and then also just the basic facts of the case right now, you have to be at the very least highly skeptical of this notion. And I think most people who have met me, know that I'm in control of myself. I am not one of these guys who just flies off the handle at any moment. I can be as passionate as anyone there is. In fact, I am a passionate person, and I am an emotional person. Sure, but the notion that I lose control. There have been plenty of situations that I've been in over the past year, some private, a couple public, where if I wanted, other people would have just simply lost control and engaged in violence. I engaged in no violence. And so one can look at that. I do have two lawyers that I'm very confident in, and I appreciate it. They are not doing this for political motivations at all. I don't really want lawyers who are politically motivated, to be honest. They are representing me and my interest and the interest of my children, and we're moving forward. This filing that was put forward by Nina, I mean, we have not been living together for around or a little over a year, and we have been trying to keep things as normal as possible. We spent holidays together. I've visited the children, obviously, tons of times, and I was living basically half and half in Montana and Virginia for a while. I'm now back here in Montana, and I've abandoned the apartment office in Virginia for other reasons, but also including this one. I just want to focus. And but anyway, she put out a filing that just struck me as again. I don't know what's in someone's heart. I don't know what motivates them. From the second I read it, I grasped that it is a gross mischaracterization of me. It's a gross mischaracterization of the events that occurred. And that is simple. That is what it is. What are her motivations? Well, very oftentimes in divorce proceedings, women will have, all the incentive in the world to simply just sling mud. And I've actually I've heard from two people that talked about this, and it was both heartening, but also kind of a little bit depressing too. One of them went through these kinds of allegations as the man in the relationship. So he had never been criminally charged with anything, but there were all these just, mudslinging, distortion of facts and so on that occurred at his divorce trial. And he basically had to go through this. Now, he was not a public figure, so he didn't have to go through the media shit show as well, but he did go through it on a personal level, and he told me what he thought about it. Another person reached out to me who said that because of these kinds of allegations, he has not been with his father in a decade. He hasn't seen his father. And again, I don't know the whole context of these things. And, as with everything, there are two sides or multiple sides. No one is blameless. That's sure. All of that's true. But just when you hear these stories and you hear of children being separated from parents and just the mudslinging and personal destruction, it is awful. And I am facing it now.
I mean, you have words that are almost insultingly soft with what's happening to men in this country. I understand that you are in a position where you don't seem to know much about this system yet, and you have a kind of reservation duty since this case, from my understanding, this case is not closed, right?
No, it's ongoing right now. Yes.
Okay, so if Richard was to say stuff here and combat aggressively the false allegations he's the victim of right now, it might be held against him in court. But I have no bound such as this one, and so I will say it. The current system of family courts in the US is a system of child kidnapping, and men are the victim of this, and you are currently going through it. And what you will see is what every man goes through in this country. As soon as their wife decides that they're not gonna have custody, the system reacts by assuming their guilt and assuming that anything that the woman says is true. And so, I would feel violating my own moral duty if I was to let such soft words be said about the current system. It is a system of child kidnapping, and people are suffering from this. And no, it's not a matter of complex situations. Complex situations may exist, but the vast majority of cases in family courts are cases of inventions by people who just want to destroy each other. That's why countries like Italy have now switched to a system where you cannot say my ex abused me. You have to demonstrate it in criminal courts, and if you don't, well, it's a 50-50 deal.
Generally in Montana, to the degree that I understand it, the default position is 50-50. So Montana is both good and bad. It's a no-fault divorce state. The default position is 50-50. It is not a shrilly liberal place like, doing this in California, New York or something. But the fact is I think the major problem is that all of these divorce filings are unsealed. And we attempted I attempted multiple times to seal them, and then actually Nina's lawyers agreed, but they are still out there. So again, everyone needs to remember this is not a criminal trial. These incidents that she mentioned, some go far back as 2010. I believe, winter of 2010, multiple times that years ago, where there was no criminal prosecution, no reporting to the police. And in fact, after these alleged incidents occurred, she elected to live with me, have children with me, engage in publishing projects with me. And again, she has a great deal of continuity in terms of where she's living right now. So if you judge this whole situation by her own actions, and then also just the basic facts of the case right now, you have to be at the very least highly skeptical of this notion. And I think most people who have met me, know that I'm in control of myself. I am not one of these guys who is just flies off the handle at any moment. I can be as passionate as anyone there is. In fact, I am a passionate person. And I am an emotional person, sure. But the notion that I lose control, there have been plenty of situations that I've been in over the past year, some private, a couple public, where if I wanted, other people would have just simply lost control and engaged in violence. I engaged in no violence. And so one can look at that, look at the actions, look at the context of all this, look at the facts, look at Nina's own decisions. Look at the fact that there is a complete absence of any kind of police report, criminal trial, so on. And one can only reach the conclusion that, I don't think Richard Spencer is an abusive person. I don't think Richard Spencer is a dangerous person. And that's the truth.
One other aspect that was brought first, Richard has published a complete statement on Twitter. And in that statement, Richard, you say, essentially, you will not be brought into soiling the reputation of your ex. In other words, you are not in a war against your ex and all this. But one aspect... Sorry?
I can't be, because the thing is, Nina is the mother of my children. I want to be in my children's lives going forward, and I want them to be in mine, and they want me to be in their lives. And so the idea of going thermonuclear with your ex at the end of the day, I'm going to have to deal with Nina rationally and going forward. And you could say diplomatically and even on a friendly fashion. I don't want to be in an endless campaign of this kind of thing. And if I wanted to dedicate my life to, remembering some nasty thing she said to me, or some annoying thing she did, or what, it's just this would be just an endless, just meaningless, needless, just shit show, to be blunt. And who benefits? I don't. Nina doesn't. The children are going to read about these kinds of things going forward. It's just awful. Now, Nina made her decision. She made a filing. It was public record as of July. So there's been a kind of Damoclesian sword hanging over my head, because I was basically like, this is a question of if and not when this filing.
So to clarify, this was public since July 2018?
To July 2018, yes. It's been public for around 3 months.
All right. Now, again, I fully understand the reconciliatory tone here, and this is needed in family court. And so I will not be pushing Richard on interrogating him, but I will say still my view on this, because I have to. There are crimes being committed currently against males, and they cannot even talk about it. I mean, you are faced with perjurious statement of an ex in this country, like I was. And if you come out and say, no, these statements are false, therefore she's a liar, therefore it's an act of kidnapping through perjury, you cannot say these things, because if you say these things in the US, the family court judge will end up removing the custody of your children, because he's going to say, oh, look at him, he's at war. And again, so I find Richard extremely soft and extremely conciliatory, but I have a duty to denunciate the fact that if these statements are false, then we are talking about false statements in a court, and these things are done with violent intent, because courts' actions on our private lives are violent actions, and if you manipulate them with lies, in my view, it is a form of kidnapping. But again, this does not commit Richard to anything. It is my view, and I must share it. Now, one aspect of this case, which was mentioned in the BuzzFeed article, is that your political beliefs keep being brought back into this case regularly, it appears, and normally, in the US, in most states of the US, you would be protected. You cannot, your political beliefs cannot influence the decision of a judge to give you access to your children or not. Yet women will repeatedly do that, particularly in white nationalist circle. They will present you as an extremist. And I find myself many times in front of judges in my life saying, look, even if I'm an extremist, I would have the right to be an extremist. And I find that there's something unfair in the current family court system, where these allegations can be brought, and you often have judges who fail at dismissing them properly. And you have articles like the BuzzFeed article who seem to claim that your political beliefs relate to how you care for your children, when it doesn't. Everyone has the right to reproduce in this country, no matter if your political beliefs are appreciated by others or not.
Yeah, it's exactly. And to be honest, I have never brought my family life into my public life. There are many people who I've talked to who said, I didn't even know you were married. Some people said, I didn't know you had children, and so on. Because
most of my audience believed you were gay, actually. Because you say so little about your private life.
I've gotten that before, yeah. But yeah, I don't talk about my public life, and to be honest, I really don't like it when I see fundraising appeals by webzines where they show pictures of children and things. It makes them targets. It's rather heartstring pulling in a way that I dislike. I just don't like it, and I've never seen it ultimately pay off. In the long term, it's bad. And I obviously want to instill values in children, and so on. I have zero desire. I have negative desire to use my children as props, or to there's a difference between, raising good children and propagandizing them, politicizing them. I would never do the latter. I mean, regardless of the divorce, regardless of these accusations, just I have zero desire to do that. And so that's how I wanted to keep it. I just simply I wanted to, in a way, have two lives, and it's became impossible. I wanted to have a life that where my children were sheltered and I could kind of get away from the public space. And then I wanted to have the other world of Richard Spencer, public figure. He's willing to, speak the unspeakable and defend the indefensible and challenge the powers that be. And he's a gladiator out there. I wanted to have those two worlds. And tragically, I think that is actually impossible. Particularly in the social media age. I mean, and it's not just the left-wing media. I mean, the left-wing media speaks for itself. I mean, they post Brett Kavanaugh and so on. I don't think anyone should be terribly surprised, but it also includes the alternative media, the kind of 4chan people who have, I think, generally speaking, never really liked me. I don't know what... I kind of have some, I can imagine what it is, but Richard Spencer's connected to the Bush family, or Richard Spencer's gay, or Richard Spencer's a Jew, Richard Spencer's a CIA agent, Richard Spencer's a Russian agent. The list goes on. Sometimes those are in combination. And the fact is, this whole thing now, it's from what I've seen, and certainly not all of it, but a vocal minority are, they would defend Kavanaugh, to the ends of the earth. But with my situation, it's like, oh, see, we told, it's jumping on these little threads, picking up on things, going all TMZ. It's just is what it is. But this is the world we live in, and you can't, it's impossible not to react to it, but you can't let it define you. You just have to kind of, you have to skate over it like like it's a frozen pond and just get to the other side. And that is what I'm going to do. I'm really not, I would just let people know. I mean, yeah, all of this is not fun. It hurts, but I'm not in some depressed state. In a weird way, I feel a bit liberated by it, because I did know that, this was a Damocles sword hovering over my head. My sense was it was when and not if. And so now that it is happening, I can actually address it, as opposed to trying to keep it, concealed or and so on. And now I can just simply address it. So I do feel, I do feel rather liberated by it. So that's where I am. But I'm going to address it. I'm not going to engage in mudslinging, but I certainly will talk about it.
I can understand that feeling. Now we may have a different approach. You surf over it. I'm more like bumping into it like a brick wall. I really like to, because it's an important thing. It's not just us two. It's an illustration of the reality of families in the US, and there is so much time lost in these proceedings that I think we would have a better nation, like recordably, statistically, we would improve the nation on almost all measures if people were not spending 3 years of their life yelling at each other and making false allegations against each other in court. Now, there was one exhibit that I said, oh, this looks like an admission. And on the show, I've analyzed this exhibit, and I've concluded that this was not necessarily an admission. So maybe you can take us through this. This was Nina sending you an email saying, to be perfectly honest, I'm not ready to converse with you after what you've done. My jaw is bruised. And you replied, I understand. I'm sorry. And I feel terrible. Was this an admission that you've committed some acts of abuse against Nina?
No, that was not an admission that I committed acts of abuse against Nina. And that episode that she referenced, again, I'm not going to go into it just because there's an ongoing process. I'm not going to go into statistics. But the notion that whole episode what was a case of my abusing her is simply wrong. And I might very well have to go into this in detail in court, but I'm not going to go into detail into it now. But no, that is not an admission of abuse.
All right. So you do not admit acts of abuse, and in fact, you've denied yesterday on Ralph Retort having committing any acts of abuse in this relationship. And we've also analyzed this part where this is a case of BuzzFeed, I believe, very misrepresenting you. Where you said, do you think your parents will attend to your funeral? And this is reported as a kind of suggestion that she would die and therefore maybe a threat of killing. Now, I've analyzed this conversation on the show here, and what I've concluded is that you were referencing to her looking like a zombie, and that was just a way of speech where you mentioned funerals. Now, maybe you don't want to go into the details with this, but that was my conclusion, that this was not a threat of death or a threat of impeding violence against her, right?
No. And secondly, this was a matter of her parents not attending a very important event in her life, and we were in a rather nasty argument. And, I regret saying something like that, which is very mean. It's unnecessary, but the fact is, I think we all know this, whether it's to our boyfriends or our girlfriends or our parents or our spouses or our brothers or our sisters. We have said things to the effect, I hate you, when in fact, we are in a loving relationship or maybe a relationship that's falling apart. But the fact is, we have all said nasty things to people we live with and we love, whom we're related to, and so on. And if someone were to record these as she was doing and then take a snippet and broadcast that as like, oh, this is the man in full, I think most everyone would consider it utterly unfair and utterly ridiculous, actually. So again, all of this kind of stuff, it's like, look at her actions in the sense of the continuity of her living situation. Look at her actions in the sense of remaining married to me all of these years. Her written statements, which probably will be brought to court, in which she pleads for the marriage to continue. I don't know what to say. These kinds of little salacious tidbits are not representative of the relationship, and they're certainly not representative of me.
All right. So that finishes the details of the BuzzFeed article. I will still share my conclusion, which I've already shared on this show. But since Richard is here, I will say it in front of him. Personally, I find no evidence in there that changes my view of Richard Spencer. This seems out of context stuff in many cases. In many cases, to me, and again, this does not commit Richard to this interpretation, it looks like attempts at obtaining admissions. It looks like a malicious attempt was done over many years by this person to obtain these admissions, and that in most cases, she did not obtain them. In most cases, let's not forget that we are looking at SMS messages that she sends herself, that she describes the acts of abuse herself in the email. Those are not admissions from Richard, and to that extent, what I see is what I've seen in my life. Women who are drifting away from you, and they start collecting information, they start recording discussions, and they start putting logs of their own recollections of events in emails, and it is not trustable data. To the extent that Richard denies the allegation, I don't see any reason to believe that he is a violent husband or that he is a bad parent. And so personally, I'm putting this whole story of BuzzFeed behind. And that's my conclusion on it. Nothing will emerge from this other than, of course, in family courts, the problem. I'm not predicting here the outcome of any family court decisions, because as it turns out, I may have a higher standard than your average family court in the US, but this does not matter. What matters here is what's happening on the public space. These allegations are not solid enough to believe that he has committed anything wrong, and I am not shocked by anything, so I do not dissociate myself from Richard Spencer. In fact, I support his actions throughout this, and he's adopting a very soft approach. I'm more of an autistic guy. I bump more on reality, and I call out when you do perjury against me in court. You will hear from me back, and in fact, I will sue you. But Richard is adopting a very peaceful approach, and that is fine. As far as I'm concerned, nothing changes from now.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. I actually, just to add a real quick tidbit, I don't think this is a case of Nina drifting away from me. I think it was something like the opposite. It was a case of in which she seemed to start recording these in 2016. She would record any arguments we had. So I presume she has hours of recordings of me, of our fights. I mean that verbally speaking, arguments, and she has selected the choice tidbits, but she was not drifting away from me. Up until very recently, she explicitly, in writing, wanted the marriage to continue, and I think this was a kind of weird hedging, or you could say a kind of, if you want to be part of the children's lives, you have to be married to me. Again, it would have been better for her if she had simply, worked with me. We tried mediation, just simply worked with me and been reasonable. There would be no need for any kind of public outrage or public scandal. And also I would be accommodating. But once she made that filing, that was a public filing. And she agreed to seal it, but the fact is, she put everything
Women are
in
evil.
My own girlfriend now. She's a fan of yours, Richard, so she wanted to show herself to you. She's really a big fan of yours. In fact, she's been a fan of yours before being my girlfriend.
Wow, that's great. I might have brought you guys together in some cosmic intellectual sense.
I mean, yes, indirectly, because she probably heard about me because of the shows, and that's where she came here.
Right. I'm saving.
What a weird night.
Yeah.
It's the night of women and the alt-right.
Right.
No, but I want to go back to what you were saying, because I want to be honest here. With the public, but at the same time, you don't have to comment after I say that, because I don't want you to commit to path of interpretations for your case. However, let me tell you that when I see emails from 2011, a woman that mentions bruises and injuries in an email, there's two things. Either she is in a violent interactions with you and you are an abuser, or she is an abuser. And so when you reject my term drifting away, I'm going to put a little more a clearer definition to what I'm saying. You were in an abusive relationship as far as I can see it. Someone who claims that she has bruises, who leaves written marks of this on the internet in a recordable fashion, is either fucking with your mind or she's being truthful. That is my view, and I don't expect you necessarily to answer, but I want people at home to understand. If you are with a woman who leaves logs of violent actions you would have done toward her, and that these violent actions are not true, if she keeps bringing back fights that you would have and misrepresents them in writing for the purpose of use later, that is an abusive relationship, and you should either leave or fix it.
I totally agree. I don't think I recognize the sinister and manipulative, perhaps, motives that were there. I would also say for women, if you are, there's a difference between, a basic, two people getting mad at each other, not talking, so on. There's a difference between that and true violent abuse. That is, punching, bloodying people's nose, all of that kind of stuff. And if you're in that situation, the institution you need to go to is the police. You don't go to the internet. and you don't, recall all of this stuff in a non-criminal proceeding. That is, a divorce proceeding is not a criminal proceeding. There's no criminal proceedings. I'm not going to, this is simply about mudslinging in order to gain custody of children. If you are truly in a violent situation, the institution you need to go to is the police and not the internet.